to speak today, but we do have two wonderful speakers here, Mr. David Crane and as well as Professor Monica Tenaglia. We'll start off today with some opening remarks. Firstly, from David Shimke, who is Director of Program for the Canadian Commission of UNESCO. Sorry, just let me pull up some information here. David has degrees from Brock University and Simon Fraser University. He is also an experienced executive author and cultural leader. And since 2020, he has been the director of the Secretariat for the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And the organization was developed by the federal government in 1957 to work as a bridge between UNESCO and Canadian civil society, academia, and governments. He leads a team responsible for implementing UNESCO programs in Canada and advising the Government of Canada on matters related to UNESCO. He's a three-time delegate to the UNESCO General Conference, and he is a member of the steering committee for the International Coalition for Inclusive and Sustainable Cities, and a frequent lecturer on diplomacy and the UN Institute for Training. And our second introductory comments will be made by Jens Bols, who is the chair of the section on human rights and archives with the International Council on Archives. He was chief archivist of UNESCO from 1994 to 2017. He is the chair of the ICA section on international organizations from 2000 to 2004. And from 2008 to 2012, Jens also coordinated, he was international section International Organization Section Chair 2004, and then again from 2008 to 2012. He also coordinated the UNESCO History Project from 2004 to 2011, and he is the co-editor of the book Archives and Human Rights, which is published by Routledge in 2021. So I'm going to start today with David Shimke to give opening remarks, and then we'll follow up with Jens. David, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Anthea. Good morning to all participating in this event, and I'm really happy to have the chance to listen as well to the speakers who are coming up after I speak for a few moments. I'd also like to take the chance to congratulate Anthea on her recent appointment as chair of our Canadian Memory of the World program. We're really excited about that, and I'll speak about that program in just a few minutes. So as Anthea mentioned, the Canadian Commission for UNESCO acts as a bridge between UNESCO and Canada. And we do this work with a keen awareness of the human rights dimensions of UNESCO's work. And that's why it's such a privilege to talk today and to join you about a subject that is at the very heart of our shared global values, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which will turn 77 in December. So in my job, I work daily with the UNESCO and the UN system, and I have to say that I think a lot about the origins of this system, and especially the optimism and energy of that time, from around 1945 to 1948. Like, it's pretty incredible, the people who were involved, the different thinkers, the different ways the UN system was born and led to the adoption of the Universal Declaration. And John Peters Humphrey was a really key part of that work. A distinguished Canadian legal scholar and a human rights advocate. He was appointed first director of the UN Division of Human Rights in 1946, and it was he who authored the first draft of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. And this draft laid the foundation for what Eleanor Roosevelt would later call the Magna Carta of all mankind. These days, I think a lot of us take for granted that we have a global structure around human rights, but the creation of such a declaration was never a given. We need to remember this and remember the efforts made by those who brought the declaration to life. And that's why at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, we're so pleased to have the John Peters Humphrey Fond in the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. We administer this register in Canada, and as a commission, we also support and coordinate submissions to the international register. So through this inscription, the John Peters Humphrey Fall have been recognized as internationally significant and part of the shared history of humanity. The recognition of Mr. Humphrey's role is not merely symbolic. It's a profound affirmation of his diligence, pragmatism, creativity, and hard work. At its heart, the UNESCO Memory of the World program is about safeguarding the documentary heritage of humanity, the fragile yet powerful records that tell the story of who we are, what we have overcome, and what we aspire to be. And why do we do this? Well, it's because preserving the history of the Universal Declaration is not just about archiving letters, meeting minutes, and drafts. It's about ensuring that future generations understand the struggles and triumphs that led to the recognition of universal human rights. And it's about resisting the undermining of those rights. It's about upholding the contributions of those who fought for human dignity and empowering those that continue the fight today. So I think it's important that we celebrate this milestone of the inscription. It's not only a recognition of the past, but a call to action for the future, a call to protect, promote, and preserve the values enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and ensure that they continue to be a beacon of hope for all. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for those words, David. And I'm going to pass it on now to Jens. You're muted, Jens. Jens? Jens, you're muted.
Sorry.
That's okay. There
I'm on now. I should be on now. So first of all, I wish to thank you, Dr. Anthea Selles and your team for having organized these lectures on John Peters Humphrey and on everything that he has meant for human rights. Indeed, as David just talked about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this document, it still stands out as a unique universal document, bringing together the aspirations of humanity for living together according to shared values and rules, based on the respect for freedom, social justice, and human rights. So, well, I've been invited to say a few words here today because I chair the section of Archives and Human Rights of the International Council on Archives, the ICA. And I can tell you that in our work, we are constantly inspired by the Universal Declaration. Knowing that in the Humphrey archives at McGill University, one will find the first handwritten draft of the Universal Declaration is particularly moving. So I find it very fitting that these archives have been included in the UNESCO Memory of the World International Register. Well, in our book, Archives and Human Rights, which is available online by open access, we provide examples of how a single document, in some cases, can be decisive as a kind of smoking gun in trials against former dictators. But more than the specific outstanding document, it is the entirety and the context of the Humphrey archives which make them so precious. They shed light on the history of the development of international human rights in the second half of the 20th century. In connection with other archives, they can deepen and broaden our understanding. Like other archival holdings enlisted in the Memory of the World Register, these records can inspire scholars and be used as a starting point for wider archival explorations. So the section of Archives and Human Rights, it started out as a small working group with just 5 participants. It was in Cape Town in 2003 at the first Archives and Human Rights conference organized by the ICA. We were inspired by the words of our keynote speaker, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, about the need to remember the painful chapters of our past in order not to repeat them. Today, we are 336 archivists and records managers in the section, and we continue our work on documenting human rights violations and on raising awareness of the close relationship between archives and human rights. The life and work of John Peters Humphrey at the United Nations and at the McGill University remain an inspiration. In a few days from now, our section will meet in Barcelona at the Congress of the ICA. Among the projects we work on are two that are particularly relevant to the two presentations we are going to hear today. We raise the attention of the United Nations of the need to preserve the archives of international temporary courts, such as the one in Sierra Leone. And we have already obtained a promising response from the United Nations. Another part of our work is to locate the whereabouts of the archives of the many truth commissions which have been created around the world. We see this as a first step towards ensuring that preservation and at some point public access to these records can be ensured, and this is essential for the history of transitional justice. So I listened to the lectures with great interest, and I wish the McGill University Archives success in promoting knowledge of John P. Humphrey's unique role in creating a universal framework for human rights. In the world we live in today, with attacks against the very foundations of the United Nations and against international human rights law, it is more important than ever to stand up for knowledge, science, and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jens. I really appreciate those opening comments. And again, thank you to David. So yes, human rights are absolutely shared values and more important even now. And I think we'll hear that from our speakers today, and that they are immutable and inalienable rights. So our speakers today are Dr. David Crane, who is a former chief prosecutor for the Special Court for Sierra Leone and founder of the Global Accountability Network. Dr. David Crane is the founding chief prosecutor of the UN Special Court. He is also the founder of the Global Accountability Network and co-author of the Caesar Report. He recently chaired a high-level working group that helped create the Special Tribunal on the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine. He'll be followed by Professor Monica Tenaglia, who is an assistant professor of archival science at Fluminense Federal University in Brazil. She previously served at the Brazilian National Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and her research examines the intersection between archives and human rights, with a particular focus on transitional justice, truth commissions, and the Brazilian military dictatorship. So I'm now going to hand it over to David to start his talk.
Well, thank you, and good morning, perhaps good afternoon, and maybe even good evening. It's just a pleasure to be here, and it's a profound honor, frankly, to speak to you as part of the John Peters Humphrey Lecture Series at McGill University. What I want to talk about today is, from my perspective, as someone who has been in the trenches for decades related to atrocity accountability and the importance of archiving atrocity accountability and the importance of international tribunals in being able to gather that story on behalf of the victims. And if you remember anything today that I speak about, and that is, we do this for and about the victims. And I think that's really, really, really critical. You know, I'm reminded of the unimaginable atrocities our world has faced. Crimes that strip away our collective humanity and challenge the principles of justice that we hold dear. Today, I want to delve into the critical, yet in some ways overlooked aspect of international justice, and that is the importance of archiving the work of the international criminal courts. And as I've said, the importance of these international criminal courts in telling the story of the victims in court, on the record, and also just publicly making the media aware of the tragedy of a particular atrocity zone. This is more than just safeguarding documents. It is about honoring the voices of survivors and ensuring that their stories resonate through time. It is our duty to carry the weight of our shared history, ensuring that it is not only remembered, but it's also understood. As we look to the future, we must embody the resounding promise, and I still think this is still important, never again, never again. I'm reminded of a time where I was just starting our work in West Africa, and we had an outreach program, a town hall program, which is part of my strategic strategy in setting up the special court for Sierra Leone. I wanted to go out and listen to my client and have them tell me what happened to them. And I traveled the entire countryside for 3 years, and this was literally my very first meeting with my client, the victims of that tragedy that saw the murder, rape, maiming, and mutilation of over 1.2 million human beings. And so I was in Kenema, just outside of Savage Waters, where the rebels would gather Sierra Leoneans and move them into these areas, chain them to pits, and work them to death in mining alluvial diamonds, and then using those diamonds to sustain the conflicts not only in Sierra Leone, but throughout West Africa. And so I wanted to hold my very first town hall meeting there because that's where it all started. And I stood in front of former rebels, maybe even current rebels, and others in a ruined auditorium that had no roof, talking to them. I told them, I want to listen to what you have to say. And for 3 hours, I stood in front of them listening to their stories, telling me what happened to them. And I began to realize that the idea of a town hall program, outreach program, was really, really critical in the success of my work in West Africa. And afterwards, I was standing there and people were coming up and saying hello and shaking my hand. A young man came up and his right arm was amputated and his left leg was amputated by the rebels. And he was hobbling on a makeshift crutch. And he walked up to me and leaned on me, put his hand on my shoulder. And he said, "Can I tell you what happened to me?" And so he told me about what I just told you about how he had been amputated. And he talked about the complete loss of his family and the burning of his village. And I just stood there respectfully and let him tell me. And it really brought home, one, the importance of these town hall programs, but it also made me realize that truly these justice mechanisms are for the victims. And what the victims want to do is tell their stories. And then it's our obligation at this point in time to take those stories and use them in court to seek justice for them, but also then take that and archive it forever so that they don't disappear into the sands of time. At the heart of international criminal justice lies that vital tenet, and that is the victims truly want to tell their stories, and they want them to be kept alive. Each case that passes through these courts represent not just the cold, hard facts of a legal framework, but profoundly human narratives filled with pain, loss, resilience, and hope. When we archive the records of these courts, we are not merely preserving transcripts or legal documentation. We are enshrining the voices that have been silenced, ensuring their echoes reach far beyond the courtroom. As we look at the testimonies of survivors, we must always remember that every document we archive encapsulates dreams interrupted, families torn apart, and lives forever altered. By preserving these stories, we give victims a platform, a chance to speak, even when they feel they are voiceless. We enable scholars, human rights advocates, and everyday citizens to connect with their experiences, emphasize, and ultimately remember their stories. This act of remembrance fosters a cultural understanding that is vital in preventing the repetition of such horrors. Never again. You know, when we archive the work of international tribunals, we also create an indispensable resource for future scholars. History should not merely consist of dates and events, it must engage in the complexities that lead to atrocities. The more comprehensive our archives, the richer and more nuanced the narratives we create. Consider the invaluable lessons learned from the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and the UN Special Court for Sierra Leone. These legacies of these institutions offer crucial insights into the nature of conflict, accountability, and justice. Now, these courts are finished. They're done with their work. Where did their work go? Well, we have residual mechanisms, such as the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, and we also have the Special Court for Sierra Leone's residual mechanism, headquartered in The Hague and Arusha. And they're tasked to preserve the vast array of documents generated by these courts. You know, as an aside, I remember briefing our management committee as I was getting ready to go to West Africa in the summer of 2002. And I laid out my general strategy of how we're going to begin the court, where we're going to be in the middle, and how we're going to finish our court. I estimated that would take between 6 and 10 years. And at the end, I had a slide talking about what do we do with our records? What do we do with the individuals who may be incarcerated? You know, we just can't drop them off somewhere and then close everything and disappear into the sands of time. So I called for them to begin already to consider residual mechanisms to care for the needs of incarcerated prisoners. And I told them this could be as long as 50 years because we have a human rights obligation. If we're going to incarcerate someone, they have to have the ability to seek redress, to make petitions on whatever that may be. And I remember the look in their eyes. They were just shocked. I mean, I literally saw jaws drop. You know, we haven't even started this court, and you're telling us we have to do something about making sure the archives and the individuals that we possibly convict and sentence, that we have to deal with them before. But that was the beginning of the residual mechanism. Was my almost my last comment to them as I was getting ready to leave, telling them that, hey, you know, the special court can be done in 6 to 10 years, which we were. But guess what? We've got to preserve the archives forever. And we also have to take care of these prisoners for the rest of their lives or for the rest of their sentences. And of course, it turned out that the sentences were lengthy. And so that for a half century now, the residual court for the special court for Sierra Leone is going to have to care for these individuals who are incarcerated. And so I say that almost with amusement, but they had never considered. And of course, we're also talking about, this was the management committee for my tribunal, but there were also 2 other tribunals that they had never considered and had never even been brought up. So that was kind of the beginning of the beginning of ensuring that these documents are cared for and these individuals are cared for under law. You know, this includes not just transcripts of trials to multimedia events and the testimonies of survivors. It's a vast array of archives. These mechanisms are vital in ensuring that these crucial records remain intact and accessible for future generations. However, we cannot ignore the looming challenge they face, most notably funding concerns that could hinder their ability to fulfill these essential roles. And this is very, very problematic. And, you know, there's even talk that even closing these residual mechanisms, and this would be horrific, not only from a legal obligation point of view, but then where do those records go? And so we've got challenges on that, and I note that with great concern. Archiving is also crucial for shaping public understanding. When documentation is made accessible, not just to legal experts, but to everyday citizens, we inspire awareness about the gravity of international crimes. This understanding fuels a collective memory and a righteous fury that is essential for holding perpetrators accountable and upholding the rule of law in our societies. Righteous fury. I have been ridiculed for using that word, but I say that because, again, we're here to do this for we represent the victims, their stories, and they have to be told, but also in seeking justice for them. I recall when we did hold that first town hall meeting, it just so happened that our first evidentiary place, our first mass grave, was literally just down the street from where I was speaking, in a place called Savage Waters. And our investigatory teams, which had only been there for a month, we'd only been there for a month, but we're already starting our work based on my plan. And they had just roped it off. This Savage Waters was a place where once those people who had been chained to these diamond pits, digging down maybe just to 10 feet. I mean, these diamonds are literally on the surface. They worked in the death, and then they threw their bodies in a place called Savage Waters. And so that was our first crime scene. And I remember I also brought the world's press with me because again, media is so critical in telling the story and keeping the world informed of your work, because nobody was paying attention to the horror of West Africa. And I remember putting on rubber boots and walking out with my chief of criminal law, Dr. Alan White, and I was literally up to my knees in bones. And I looked around, and the press is kind of on the edge. Several of them were vomiting into the bushes because this was their first time that they've ever seen an atrocity. And I just turned to Al, and in righteous fury, I said, "We're going to get these bastards for what they've done to these people." So I'm proud of that term, and I want to let you know that that's why we do go out and seek justice for them, but also then we archive their stories. The promise of never again is born from a commitment to remember and to educate. It challenges us as individuals, as communities, and as nations to refuse to let atrocities fade into silence. Righteous fury. Public engagement initiatives like outreach programs, town hall meetings, and educational campaigns help bridge the gap between communities and the lived experience of those victims. By allowing victims to share their stories in these settings, we create a powerful opportunity to humanize the facts and figures. And this is so critical. And this is why I'm telling you these real world stories of my time in West Africa, because we do have to humanize when we're talking about atrocity accountability and archiving. We move beyond the sterile language of legal documents and delve into the raw reality of human suffering and resilience. Each story, and I say each story, every victim has a story, told becomes a thread in the tapestry of our shared history, reminding us of our common humanity and challenging us to confront our roles in this global narrative. In 2004, in March of 2004, I was in a town hall meeting in McKinney, which had been the headquarters of the infamous Revolutionary United Front, the ones that amputated people, cut off limbs and arms. And as I always did, I didn't stand in front of them or at a high table or behind a lectern. I literally walked among them, of course, much to the concern of my close protection officers. I had a level 3A vest on, a very light vest, but could stop a 9mm round. They were never happy about me doing this, but I insisted that I stand among the victims so that I would humble myself before them and let them know that I was no better than they were, and all I wanted to do was hear their stories. And so I would do this, like I've already alluded to, up to 3 to 4 hours listening to their stories. And they would be terrible sometimes. We would laugh, we would cry, we would hug, and we would get to know each other. And it was about 2 hours into this meeting in McKinney, and a young man stood. He was no more than 10 feet from me. He was ragged. He was he was yellowish looking. He had malaria and probably some other diseases. And he stood up and he said, "I killed people. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. And he fell into my arms, weeping. And as I was holding him, blinking back tears myself, a young woman stood up and probably no more than 25 feet from me. She was holding a child. I don't know really how her age was, but she was missing half her face. It had been stuck in a pot of boiling water by the rebels. And she said, the rebels did this to me. This is in Creole, which I got to know while I was there. She said in Creole that the rebels did this to me. Seek justice for us. And so I tell you these stories because, again, as I just mentioned, each of these stories are personal and they have to be told. They have to be, more importantly, listened to. But then, of course, they have to be preserved. And in fact, that is the introduction to my book, Every Living Thing, which I wrote my time in West Africa because I was so moved by the courage of that young child soldier and that young mother standing up and telling their stories in front of other people. And as you can see, it's not hard to build a righteous fury in seeking justice for these people. An integral part of this tapestry is the work of truth commissions, entities that complement the efforts of international courts. My vision in bringing together the UN Special Court for Sierra Leone and the Sierra Leonean Truth and Reconciliation Commission really serves as a compelling example of how collaborating can foster accountability and understanding. Together, they have sought to deliver justice, but also to uncover and document the truths of the nation's past. I'm famous for this comment, and I think it's really important, and that is truth plus justice equals sustainable peace. If one of those is missing, then you won't have a sustainable peace. The peace may be illusory. You may have temporary peace, but you have to have that truth and you have to have that justice. And that captures the essence of our partnership in Sierra Leone. I recall people even had conferences on having a truth commission and a international justice mechanism would not work. I mean, people spent a whole day talking about how bad this was going to be and how it never succeeded. Of course, I was listening to all of this, somewhat with a smirk on my face. But, when I was appointed chief prosecutor, I made an announcement that I would never use any information gathered by the Truth Commission in my cases against those who were most responsible for the destruction of West Africa. And I sought and worked very hard in building a relationship with the Truth Commission. And at the end of the day, it took all the wind out of the sails of all the naysayers, and it worked. So Truth Commissions explore the collective narratives of communities, excavating the historical roots of conflict and providing victims with the recognition they so desperately need. When aligned, Truth Commissions and international tribunals amplify their impact, ensuring that the stories of individuals and communities are preserved and honored. The Sierra Leone model emerges as a powerful testament to the importance of collective memory. By documenting findings and testimonies from both the Special Court and the Truth Commission, we gained insights into the causes and consequences of that conflict. These lessons were vital for efforts to build lasting peace and safeguard human rights in the future of West Africa, and particularly Sierra Leone. And we worked very hard at that. The Truth Commission, I had lunch with all the commissioners every month, and we publicly announced our working together on a UN day, 1 December of 2002. Bishop Joseph Humphrey, the commissioner, and I stood literally arm in arm and declared that the Special Court for Sierra Leone and the Truth Commission was going to work together to seek justice and accountability for the people of Sierra Leone. And it was a huge success. And excuse me. And it worked throughout the time of the life of the commission. And it is an example. It hasn't happened since, but it is an example. It's a case study that if we do have another Truth Commission and we by chance have to have a regional or a local international tribunal, that's a great model. It can work. And that's, I think, important. Truth plus justice equals sustainable peace. Now, as we consider these experiences, we must also acknowledge the remarkable role technology plays in enhancing the archiving of atrocity. Digital preservation methods have transformed the way we maintain records, ensuring that they remain safe, accessible, and relevant. By embracing technology, we can make sure that history is not just archived, but is alive and actively used in understanding our past. The challenge, though, with technology is that in some ways, back when we were in West Africa and Sierra Leone, we did it the old-fashioned way. We just had archives, paper archives. Remember those? And we collected paper archives and we wrote down testimonies. And of course, obviously, we're gathering evidence to prove our cases. But that was really not that far ago. That was a little over 20 years ago. And it's amazing how far we've come. Now, in some ways, all of this technology has actually made it harder in finding evidence to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack because, and this is always the challenge of the law, is that the law is always 10 steps behind technology. And so it doesn't change as rapidly as the technology is, which changes weekly, whereas the law does not. And so the rules of procedure and evidence, the rules of evidence still haven't changed. If you are a lawyer, you have to understand that if you're going to offer something into evidence, you have to lay the foundation and prove its relevance to the case. And just because you've got a video or pictures or whatever, doesn't mean that actually is going to go into evidence. I've got to show who took the picture, when they took the picture, that it's a factual depiction of what took place. And that's hard. Now we're getting better at it, and we can go back into metadata and all these things. But I recall when I was on the team who investigated the allegations of Caesar, and I'm the person who named him Caesar because we didn't want to use his real name because he would have been dead by the end of the week. Who came out of Syria as a master sergeant in the Syrian army. He was a forensic photographer, and he had hidden in his shoe 54,000 high-definition photographs of tortured and maimed victims and ruined human beings. And we ended up being able to determine that actually was direct evidence of the deaths of around 12,000 human beings in just one detention facility. And that was amazing as far as that was I remember briefing the Security Council, showing him those horrific pictures. We were trying to get the Security Council to pass a resolution referring the Syrian case to the ICC. And of course, the Russians and the Chinese vetoed it. It never went any farther, and hence no more justice for the people of Syria at the international level. But I remember them at the end after our presentation, they questioned me for 2 hours around that table. I was in that room for 3 hours. And they asked me, they said, well, this obviously is clear evidence. We have Assad. We're going to be able to find him guilty and all of those things. And I said, wait a minute. All this is just pictures. This isn't evidence. And then I had to explain to them the rules of evidence. That just because you've got a lot of stuff doesn't mean you have a case. So those rules don't change, and that's a challenge and an assumption. So in reality, even though now we're able to, instead of just pieces of paper in your evidence room, you have petabytes of data, and somewhere in there is something that you can actually prove as a piece of evidence. So in fact, and from my point of view as a chief prosecutor who's set up 2 tribunals, it actually makes our work in some ways more difficult because, again, it can be overwhelming. I call it a tsunami of data, and all it is data. And it takes a long time to turn that data into criminal information and that criminal information into evidence. Advancement in artificial intelligence significantly enhance our ability to navigate and analyze archive materials. Natural language processing, for example, NLP, enable us to search through vast databases of documents at lightning speed, helping researchers find key testimonies and evidence in a fraction of the time it would take manually. This means that the stories of victims are not lost in a sea of text. They can be discovered and shared quickly, allowing for a more immediate and impactful connection to the past. AI can also categorize and index documents based on content and themes, making it much easier for users to find relevant information. Imagine a researcher who, with a few clicks, can access crucial historical evidence, or a student who can seamlessly explore the intricate narratives within our archives. This technological empowerment ensures that the histories of atrocities are not only preserved, but actively utilized for education, advocacy, and memorialization. However, as we embrace these technologies and these advancements, we must remain vigilant. The financial realities faced by institutions responsible for archiving these immense bodies of work cannot be ignored. The residual mechanisms, like I've said, face budgetary constraints. And these systems are expensive. And so with no money, we don't have the capacity to really take advantage of the technology. But it makes it imperative that the international community prioritize this funding and support to preserve such a critical part of our history. Ultimately, we must recognize the power of archiving in reinforcing the rule of law as a stabilizing force in international relations. An informed public empowered with historical knowledge becomes an advocate for justice and transparency. By ensuring that the work of international criminal courts is meticulously archived, we contribute to the establishment of a cultural memory where justice is cherished, where we can draw lessons from the past to foster peace in the present. The public's understanding of the efficacy of international law cultivates trust and encourages engagement with legal mechanisms designed to prevent and remedy human rights violations. Archiving goes beyond merely storing documents. It is a tool for remembrance, a catalyst for justice, and a means of fostering peace. As we dedicate ourselves to documenting the past, we honor the promises made to countless victims around the globe, ensuring their stories echo through time. Concluding, the legacy of atrocity accountability forms a complex tapestry woven together from the stories of victims, scholarly inquiry, public understanding, and global cooperation. Let us not forget that the work of the major tribunals in the modern era hinges significantly on the commitment of the global community to sustain funding and ensure that our archival legacy is preserved for future generations. As we endeavor to tell the stories and promote justice, let us commit to ensuring that these threads never unravel. The stories of those who have suffered tether our actions together in a promise of never again. And I'll conclude with a little vignette. I'm full of vignettes, a lot of war stories. But I was getting ready to leave. I'd been in West Africa and Sierra Leone for 3 years, and I had just been made a honorary paramount chief by the civil societies of Sierra Leone. So you can call me, instead of doctor, you can call me chief if you'd like. That's also an honorific that I'm very proud of. But I went to see my good friends at the Milton Margai School for the Blind, a group that I had been with for the full 3 years as part of my outreach program. And I got to know them so well that they called me Uncle Dave. And it was really amazing to sit in front of them. And I'd always bring with me, you have to be if you can imagine a place where does not have anything that is sweet, not like that we are so used to in the Western world. And so I'd always bring not a very good good for them, but they loved the Coca-Cola I brought and the candy bars. And so I would distribute them, and we would sit down together. I would sit in a chair in front of them, and we would just talk. And they would ask me questions about what I'm doing, but I had to say goodbye to them, and they knew I was coming to say goodbye. And as we finished our candy bars and Cokes and stuff like that, they had a wonderful choir, which actually performed before Her Majesty the Queen, late Majesty the Queen Elizabeth in Westminster Abbey. They said, "We'd like to sing you a song." And so they all stood up and very proudly sang "It's a Small World After All." So with that, I conclude my remarks, and thank you for allowing me to address you today.
Thank you so much, David, for that really powerful testament of witnessing and ensuring that we document and preserve uh, atrocities to facilitate restorative justice and accountability. And definitely hear the call of never again and the importance of archives of ensuring that. So I'm going to hand off now to Monica Tenaglia, who will be speaking about her experiences with Truth and Reconciliation in Brazil. Monica, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening as well, depending where you are. So I would like to start thanking Anthea and Rio. Anthea, thank you very much for the invitation, and Rio as well for your help. It's very nice to be here with you guys and listening to David as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll share my presentation. I have some slides here, and if you can let me know if you are seeing it, I'll put if you can let me know if is everything okay.
It's working.
And am I changing these slides now?
Yep, everything's working.
Okay. So I would like also to thank the audience for watching us today and for their interest to listening to us. When I was preparing this presentation, I actually thought it would be nice to quickly share with you some information regarding the Brazilian materials that are in UNESCO's Memory of the World International Register. So I need to say as well that it's a pleasure to take part in the lecture series that are celebrating the archives of John Peters Humphrey in the UNESCO's Memory of the World International Register. Those initiatives, they are very important because they give attention to the documentary heritage. So in Brazil, we have 13 collections, found archival materials actually. And I would like to highlight briefly two of them. In 2025, it was nominated the Ethno-Historical Map produced by Kurt Nimuendaju. And in 2011, the archives of the National Information Service. The handicraft map, the ethno-historical map that was produced by the German ethnologist Kurt Enkel. He was given the name Nimuendaju by the indigenous group called Guaranis. They are actually in the southeast of Brazil. So this map is approximately 2 meters by 2 meters, and is a result of Kurt's research on indigenous communities in Brazil. The map presents information on language, cultures, and memories of indigenous peoples, and is held by the Emílio Guild Museum in a city in the north of Brazil called Belém, in the state of Pará, where is a city where I used to live, where I lived for 3 years before I moved back to the south of Brazil in the beginning of this year. The second archives I would like to bring your attention to is the archives of the National Information Service, which was the main body of information of the military dictatorship in Brazil, a service that lasted until 1990. The archives were transferred to the National Archives in 2005 and largely supported the investigations into human rights violations carried out by truth commissions. The funds comprises documents produced by the National Information Service and other documents that were received from the various bodies, including the armed forces and the federal police. So also contains papers on repression, prisons, political parties, popular movements, the guerrilla, international relations, and so on. This is the logo, the brand logo of the National Information Service, which were commonly found and is still found in the archives. My presentation is about like an overview of the relationship between truth commissions and archives, and it's a research that I have been studying for the last 15 years. I just to give you some context about myself, so I can get into this, to explain to you this research more easily. And I think I started looking to the subject when I took my master's degree. I was looking to the relationship between records management and the Freedom of Information Act. And I had started working with archives a few years before, during an undergraduate degree in history. And as this time went by, as I became an archivist and later on an assistant professor in archival science, it became clear to me that all activities that we do with archives and as an archivist involving the management, organization, and preservation of documents must be orientated towards the access to information. So I believe that access to information can transform people's lives for better, but also for worse, when, for instance, there is a lack of information or misinformation. So I started working with archives regarding human rights violations in 2014, when I worked as an archivist for the National Truth Commission. Although I had been working with archives since my first year of my BA course back in a long time ago, 1999. Then with the National Truth Commission, I was able to see in practice the use of the Freedom of Information Act to access information regarding human rights violations, and the use of archives for the defense of human rights. And in the Truth Commission's perspectives, we can think about the right to memory, right to truth, right to justice, right to reparation. Then I took my PhD looking into truth commissions and archives, expanding the research not only to the National Truth Commission, but also into other Brazilian local commissions in order to understand the relationship of them with the archives. I currently teach in the archival science course at the Federal Fluminense University and at the postgrad course in information science at the Federal University of Pará, where I was working until the beginning of this year. I put a photo of my book there because I wanted to bring your attention for the book, although it's in Portuguese, but this book was published based on my PhD, and the book is entitled Truth Commissions and the Archives of the Brazilian Military Dictatorship, which I'm very proud to say that it has won a few prizes last year, but has won the main Brazilian national awards, which is called the Jabuti Acadêmico. But I'm saying that about the prize because for us it's a relief that we feel that the theme of the military dictatorship in Brazil has now lost its space, especially with the former President Jair Bolsonaro administration, where we had before, it was very difficult to research into human rights subjects. It was very difficult for the Brazilian transitional justice bodies, especially to work. So the price shows, in my point of view, that powerful forces may try to change or redirect people's interests, rewrite histories, or erase memories, but they remain there, those stories. They resist, and they eventually return to the debate as we have the space now to properly research and speak about it again. So the overview that I'm going to present, including the truth commissions and archives, and the importance of the archives for the defense of human rights, is based on my PhD research and other researches that I have been carrying out since then. Before going into the truth commissions, I would like to present a background for other transitional justice initiatives that were created in Brazil after the end of the military dictatorship in 1985. Differently from our Latin American neighbors who created truth commissions shortly after the end of their military dictatorship, the Brazilian National Truth Commission was created only 26 years after the end of the Brazilian military dictatorship. But like other Latin American countries, Brazil established the amnesty law in 1979, still during the dictatorship, which granted amnesty not only for crimes considered political, but also for crimes related to them. As this law now is still in force in Brazil, unlike some other Latin American countries, here is extremely difficult to punish perpetrators who worked for the government at that time because of this law. Within the context of transitional justice, we had the first initiative back in 1995, so 10 years after the end of the dictatorship, with the creation of the Special Commission on Political Deaths and Disappearances. With this commission, the Brazilian state acknowledged its responsibilities for deaths and disappearances, in addition to enabling the families of those victims to have the right to reparations. According to the Amnesty Commission's reparations, Then in 2002, Brazil created the Amnesty Commission to enable victims of the dictatorship related to different forms of human rights violations to obtain financial reparations, violations such as people who lost their jobs, for instance. According to the Amnesty Commission's website, since 2002, the Commission has received more than 80,000 amnesty requests. Approximately half of them have been granted, another 30,000 have been denied, and the rest of the requests are under review. It is important to note at this point that these two commissions, the Special Commission on Political Deaths and Disappearances and the Amnesty Commission, were practically pulled apart during former president's administration, Jair Bolsonaro. Nowadays, under Lula's government, the commissions have returned slowly to their activities. Other important initiatives to understand the functioning of Brazilian truth commissions and their relationship with the archives were the transfer of the archives of the former political police to the state archives in the 1990s. Furthermore, in 2005, the archives of the National Information Service that I mentioned before were transferred to the National Archives at the regional headquarters located in Brasília, the capital of Brazil, the National Archives. The main building is at Rio de Janeiro. In 2009, the Reference Center for Political Struggles in Brazil, known as Revealed Memories, was created within the National Archives with the purpose of identifying and giving visibility to the archives of the military dictatorship through a large database, in addition to promoting awards and seminars. There's information I would like to add here. Due to the celebration of John Peters Humphrey archives, and it is important for the human rights research and thinking that funds is a personal fund, is that the Revealed Memories database contains approximately 240 funds, archival collections, in which 76 of them are personal funds, so more than 30 in the total, demonstrating the importance of personal and private materials for human rights purposes. And finally, in 2010, the third National Human Rights Program was published under Lula's second administration, recommending the creation of a National Truth Commission. In 2011, the National Truth Commission was created through a national law, at the same time the creation of the Access to Information Law. This law enables access to public information and stipulates that information about human rights violations cannot be restricted. The National Truth Commission worked for over 2 years. More than 200 people worked in the commission and presented a final report in 2014. The Truth Commission identified 434 political deaths and missing persons and named 377 perpetrators in its final report, similar to the report of the South African Truth Commission. But those people who were named in the final report cannot be sent to jail due to the amnesty law that I mentioned to you before. What we've been debating in recent years in Brazil is that human rights violations happened in the military dictatorship, not only due to political resistance. So they not only happen to people in the cities, for instance, especially who fought against the military dictatorship, and who are basically people that were identified amongst those more than 400 people. We have been looking to minority groups, people who did not even resist or even know about the dictatorship, such as poor people, people from favelas, in rural areas, and how the military dictatorship neglected these people, and how the military government had relationships with private companies, how they became richer, and how violations of people's rights were allowed for economic gain. And here we are considering especially indigenous communities in the north of Brazil and the companies that were established in the Amazon area. As a consequence, we understand now that these victims of the military dictatorship in Brazil were much higher than this number that appears in the National Truth Commission final report. The National Truth Commission also promoted partnerships and agreements to produce and share information. This led to the creation of several local truth commissions, which to this day seem to me still quite unique scenario internationally. These commissions were established in states, cities, universities, and entities such as professional associations, unions, and so on. During my research, I managed to identify 88 local truth commissions created between 2012, so just after the creation of the National Truth Commission, and 2019 was the year that I finished my PhD research. To get this number, I considered the truth commissions, which I found some official information like laws, reports, and at that time, some websites. But nowadays, every now and again, I still find some information about the creation of a new truth commission, or I discover a commission that was created during the time of my survey, which I didn't identify at that time. So I believe this number is over 100 local truth commissions, and is a number that is actually mentioned in the National Truth Commission final report. However, among all these truth commissions, I was able to locate only 27 final reports, and I chose 20 of them to work with. So we can say that many of those local commissions, they did not hand in a final report. We managed to establish during the research that lots of them were created and were not given conditions to carry out their investigations and their work, so they didn't manage to complete their work and their investigations. Other final reports were incorporated to the reports of other truth commissions as well. This is an overview of the local truth commissions in Brazil that we managed to establish during the research. This map shows the location of truth commissions by Brazilian state created between 2012 and 2019, comprising 88 truth commissions. Many truth commissions were created in the states of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, which are the origin of many of the political deaths and disappearances listed in the National Truth Commission's final report. However, as you can see, several truth commissions were also established, particularly in the northeast region of the country. I would like to highlight that these local truth commissions managed to focus more on local issues in relation to the military dictatorship, expanding various nations of human rights violations based on their particularities, far beyond what the National Truth Commission could have done, because obviously the size of Brazil, which is an extremely large country. I would like to highlight one aspect of the relationship of these truth commissions with the archives that I identified in their final reports. The main problems regards the use and access to the archives. And it's interesting to understand that when those commissions, they are talking about those difficulties, they are explaining why they didn't go further into their investigations. So this shows the importance of the archives for their works. I organized them into two aspects: the difficulty of legal access, so the lack of enforcement of the right to information legislation, and the resistance of the agencies to making the archives available. And secondly, the difficulty in accessing the archives due to the lack of archival treatment and the inexistence of finding aids. Regarding the first perspective, despite the existence of legal provisions for access to the archives of the military dictatorship, most of the truth commissions reported problems with legal access to the documents. So 17 out of the 20 truth commissions analyzed. Regarding the difficulty in accessing archives due to the lack of archival treatment and the inexistence of finding aids, all the 20 truth commissions reported some problems. Moreover, in fact, many of the archival collections used by the commissions had already been transferred to an archival institution many years before. So why those materials were not organized by the time of the truth commissions? Also, truth commissions located archives in terrible conditions, like in large warehouses, in disused bathrooms, under staircases, so in various conditions of deterioration and abandonment. I would like to show you some photographs of their final reports. I always show those two photographs here. They are photos of documents found by the Rio de Janeiro State Truth Commission inside the former political police building, which is now owned by the civil police. For several years, there has been a movement to turn this building into a memorial site or a museum, but nothing has been decided on this matter yet. There is a big movement now in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, where I live, regarding the problem with this building and these documents now. One of the photographs is on my book cover as well. These are photos of documents found by the São Paulo City Truth Commission in one of the cemeteries that was investigated regarding the hiding of the bodies of missing individuals buried as indigents. In fact, this Truth Commission has a very interesting final report because it details the preservation conditions of the documents in cemeteries, places rarely investigated by other truth commissions in Brazil. This also shows the importance of private archives to the investigation of human rights violations, because some of the truth commissions used archives of notary offices, private hospitals, and personal archives. Other point I would like to highlight is that very important from my point of view for the training of archivists, especially the area where I work and I teach, are the partnerships established between truth commissions and archival science courses and history courses. 12 truth commissions established partnerships with those courses, and these initiatives included students working on research, description, and preservation and conservation activities. Not only did the students contribute to the truth commission's works, but they also had the opportunity to get familiar with human rights activities. And next there is an example of those initiatives. This photo is from the final report of the Truth Commission of the Federal University of Espírito Santo, state in the southeast of Brazil, which organized partnerships with the history department. This Truth Commission has a very interesting registration with this experience. I have written a paper that is in English about this experience and this importance of the partnerships and the training of archivists regarding human rights. And finally, other aspect that I would like to point to you that Jens has also mentioned before is the relationship between the truth commissions in archives, is the location of the archives produced by the truth commissions. In my research, I mentioned a 2004 paper written by Trude Patterson about her works of locating the archives of 20 national truth commissions. According to Trude Patterson, the first lesson she learned from that experience was how difficult it was to know what happened to those documents. In this sense, the experience of searching for the archives from the Brazilian Truth Commissions was similar to Patterson's, pointing to the lack of available information about the destination given to the archives or their presence in their custodial institutions. It was possible to locate the archives of 11 out of 20 truth commissions, 11 archives. 2 truth commissions had not produced an archive, and the vast majority of the archive institutions that held the truth commission's archives did not make the existence of those archives clear in their collection guides or in their websites. This is the National Truth Commission's website, which is preserved. They consist of, the archives actually consist of thousands of documents, testimonies from victims and family members, statements from political repression agents, photographs, and so on, and also the relationship between cooperation activities such as with Argentina, Germany, Chile, United States, especially in Uruguay. The archives were transferred to the National Archives in Rio de Janeiro months after the National Truth Commission's conclusion, and I was part of that transference. It is available online, and the Commission's website has been preserved and contains extensive information about the Commission's documents, the final report, as you can see. I don't know how much you can understand in Portuguese. This is an overview. So nowadays, more than 10 years after the release of the National Truth Commission's final report, we see that research and investigations into the military dictatorship have continued. As I mentioned before, we have been looking into minority groups such as indigenous people, gay community, women, Black people, children, and the relationship between private companies and the military governments. Also, in recent years, 2 truth commissions were created in states, one in the north of Brazil and another one in the northeast. And also, truth commissions have been created in various universities. There are also initiatives by universities that have revoked titles given to military presence and agents of the military dictatorship. Also, universities have organized symbolic ceremonies of awarding diplomas to dead and missing students. This is the last slide I would like to show you. These are the most final reports that have been published in Brazil. They are from 2 different states. The report from the state of Sergipe, located in the northeast of Brazil, which provides interesting insights into how military governments used local myths to instill fear and control of the population. And the final report of the commission from the state of Pará, a report that I have been working extensively. So the state of Pará is located in the north of Brazil, in the Amazon area, and this commission extensively investigated violations against indigenous peoples in that area. As we understand that we have been moving to discuss other kinds of violations that were not really discussed in the decades before. Obviously, we don't have many documents regarding those violations. So the investigations now needs to use lots of testimonies. So that implies other kinds of difficulties as well, not only talking to the victims, but as David said before, as we produce digital documents, like as we are registering those testimonies, we also need some other ways and understanding and research resources of preserving those digital materials. I think that's it. I wanted to present. I hope I've managed to provide an overview of the Brazilian Truth Commissions and demonstrated the importance of archives for their investigations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you for that really amazing overview of all the work that's happened in Brazil around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'm opening it up to questions, so you can use, there's a Q&A button at the top band of the webinar if you would like to put your questions in there. I might start off with a question just to get our speakers going, and then we'll try. We have about 7 minutes to take questions. So in light of your experience, David and Monica, and this is a question I also had for my previous lecture, what do you think the role is of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as we look at Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, as we look at human rights violations that are currently happening around the world, and particularly picking up on your point, David, around the Security Council and some of the things that you presented and how sometimes that can maybe impede sometimes human rights, searching justice from human rights. What is the role of the UDHR in this context? Is there still a role for the UDHR?
I'll just jump in real quickly. Yes,
Of
there
course.
certainly is. I really enjoyed your presentation, Monica, and thank you very much. You know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the cornerstone by which we were able to establish the jurisprudence of criminality for the modern era. Because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a lot of people don't fully understand this, is, you know, up until this time, yes, from an ethical point of view, social point of view, a religious point of view, human beings had a right to exist. But there had never been an international statement that human beings have a legal right to exist. And so therefore, if you destroy them in some form or another without any kind of justification, you are actually committing a crime. And that allowed us in the modern era, as we began to establish what we call international criminal law, that basic premise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is really the cornerstone by which we now have established the ability to prosecute those who feed on their own citizens, tyrants, thugs, and dictators. So I think this is really, really critical in our overall understanding and assessment of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that's just that. But the challenge is then sustaining that moment, sustaining the effort, and sustaining the four corners of the Universal Declaration itself. And of course, I'm proud to say I think that modern international criminal law, atrocity accountability, has brought forward that concept of seeking justice for victims of atrocity. But also, in light of that, it allows us then to do, in fact, the important work of categorizing and archiving the tragedies. So I think at the end of the day, the Universal Declaration is really the cornerstone for all of our efforts, whether it be prosecution or archiving or a combination thereof, in our work towards ensuring that we never do it again.
Monica, do you have any thoughts?
I think I could add to what David said about the importance of access to information that the Declaration puts in Article 5, talking about that importance, and in that perspective puts the central role of information to the defense of other human rights. So, and then I bring to our areas about the archives, about the archivists, about professionals who work with information. And there is a way, we say in Brazil that access to information is the first door for other human rights. So you need information to have established other human rights. So access to information is a human right, is a door for other human rights. So I really like that, and I think that this is like I always use the declaration as well to bring the importance of the archives documents for the defense of human rights.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any questions coming from the floor? I don't see any right now, unless, do you have any coming through, Rio? No? Let's see what other questions I can ask. There's lots of questions I have here. What was the greatest challenge that you both faced as you've worked in this area of archives and human rights?
Well, my biggest challenge was that the United Nations was not really helpful in our process of working through all of these issues that we faced in West Africa. To include, they were outraged that we would have an outreach program and a town hall program, and they refused to fund it. And so I had to go to the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation to fund our outreach efforts, and they gave us over $500,000 to do so. But isn't that an interesting perspective? But it's one that's not known, though I very clearly mention it in my book, Every Living Thing, and that is just that. So that the big challenge is just the reluctance. I still don't think the international community gets it, and that is victim testimony, victim ability, or allowing victims to tell their stories. I think it's something that is always overlooked. And when we were creating the Special Tribunal on the Crime of Aggression for Ukraine, we very much talked about outreach and town hall programs giving the victims a voice. That was my big challenge. Was just the knee-jerk reaction of a reluctant United Nations to actually assist in that.
Wow.
Surprising, but true.
And yet unsurprising to some degree. Monica, could you talk a bit about what your greatest challenge is?
I think here in the Brazilian scenario, I could say first is a misunderstanding that people generally have on human rights, and especially for the last few years, that has been added with social media and the previous government that we had here before, that was like what we said, there was a big defender of the military dictatorship. So he was a president. So that was, quite shocking, but that happened. Then, so first is the difficulties of people understanding human rights. And for the perspective of people who work with that, and I'm talking about the archives here, is that we have, talking about the archives, we have very difficulties relating to the archival policies to be implemented. So we don't have many resources. The archive institutions, they are often like in trouble, financial trouble. So how can we talk about the importance of the archives for human rights if we cannot preserve them, make them available? Many institutions, they don't have the resources to receive the archives that are in different departments, receive personal archives. So it's not only this, so it's a big problem here culturally, as well, as we don't really pay attention to the importance of the archives. and so on. So I think that are the biggest problems in my view.
If I could add just real quickly,
course.
one of the challenges also before we conclude is that right now, and I mentioned it in my remarks, is that we this time next year we may not have any residual mechanisms for the international courts. There's no money, and it does look bleak, and so there's a real possibility that we could lose that record. And how they're going to be able to justify incarcerating human beings without an ability for them to seek redress is not understandable. So perhaps something will be done. They have to. There, human rights, legality of it all. You can't incarcerate somebody without giving them the ability to seek redress in any way, shape, or form. So watch out and be vocal on that, because that's also a present day challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David and Monica, and to Jens and David Shimke as well for joining us today. Some really great talks and introductory remarks, and some just really compelling sort of testimonies to the importance of archives and human rights. So this is the last virtual lecture that we're having as part of this series. We have another one planned at the end of November, and our guest speaker will be Maître François Crépeau, who is the former head of the Center for Legal Pluralism and Human Rights here at McGill. There will be confirmation of the date forthcoming, and I'm hoping to have that out as soon as I possibly can. But thank you again to everyone who's come and assisted this lecture. A special thanks as well to Rio Justice, who's been an indispensable help to me in getting and coordinating all of our speakers and our different guests that we've had as part of this lecture series. And thank you again to everyone who's attended. We've really appreciated you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.